Welcome to the Quarantine Stove Star Mount Zion.
Welcome to the second part of my conversation with Pastor Carleathea Benson. In today's segment, you'll get to hear some things from her about how she sees racism in the world today, as well as other ways that she has experienced racism in her life. And so again, I want to thank Pastor Benson for being a conversation partner in this series, and thank you for tuning in. I'm curious, I think there are a lot of very well-meaning white Christians, and I would put myself for most of my life in this place of saying, what you're talking about, Pastor Benson, is stuff that happened years ago. We don't have separate water fountains now. We don't have segregated transit now. We some of the things that you share, those are from a long time ago. How would you say that racism is still happening, not just way back then, but in ways that a lot of white people don't see?
Well, institutional racism is what permeates everything. It's just like with Congressman John Lewis, who recently died, and the beatings and all that he took, which were back in the 60s. But they passed the Voting Rights Act. Lyndon Baines Johnson signed it because of how they had struggled so and how he was beaten and everything. And it gave us the right to vote without having to have different types of identification from others, that we didn't have to count the jelly beans in the jar and know how many there were in order to vote, that we didn't have to prove that we could spell our names or write in order to vote, when we knew that there were whites in the same boat but could vote. A lot, and the statistics prove it, as we've been doing our genealogy. Whites recorded our names, but they didn't know how to spell them and didn't ask us and wrote them, and we're having a hard time with constructing names. They wrote it the way they thought it should be. So what we look at is today the Supreme Court just earlier in the year, or late last year, they struck down a part of it that each state now can ask for the type of identification they need for a person to vote. Well, that took us back. That took us back years. And it's now they're trying to get the John Lewis Act reaffirmed so that we don't have to produce all these different credentials in order to vote. That's one thing. But we also have it in the disparity in pay. People work and do the same job, and you have that blacks are paid less than whites. Mm-hmm. Whites sometimes come to a job and blacks have to train them for what they're to do, but they get no more money for doing that in the training. Mm-hmm. That's at Clemson. I worked at Clemson University for 32 years. It was there. And I struggled, and I had good supervisors in the end who lifted me up to get my salary increased. But I also had a department chair that could have cared less and didn't want to give me the increases. They were done because of other folks stepping in on my behalf. And the other folks were white. It's everywhere. It's in housing. The disparity we hear about in persons in the housing conditions, and even as we have built along Highway 93, the housing that they said to persons as they basically took their property, because 93 was a black community, and they sent folks in who were black, who were willing to go talk to them and say, hey, you want to sell your property? They're going to give you some money for it. Well, you get $5,000 and somebody comes in and puts up apartments there that are worth paying, $800, $900, $1,200 a month, then your land was worth a whole lot more than that. So we see it in a lot of areas. We see it when children go hungry because parents don't have the money to buy what they need to sustain them, but there's no program that's there really. I mean, you have food stamps, but I had a lady in the church that I served up here who was on food stamps, and they gave her $7 in food stamps a month. I stood in line in Greenville County while she sat down. She was in her late 80s. And I asked them, why was this woman only getting this? I wanted to see the documentation. And so they upped it to $17 a month and never showed me the documentation. So the system has it has corruption in it. It has people that think people don't deserve. This woman was sweet as she could be, but she was treated unfairly just because of the color of her skin. And I have seen it played out over and over again. And we have to be sensitized. You know, we talk about diversity training. To me, diversity just means that we talk about our color, skin color, maybe some things about where we come from. But sensitivity training says that I need to get to know you better. I need to understand why you feel what you feel, and not just on my side, but on your side as well. Because if I don't know your stories, then I don't understand why you do or act the way you do. If you don't know my story, you won't understand why I do or react the way that I do. So when we sensitize to one another, we begin to understand the plight and why folks do what they do. I told you about my daughter working in the Georgia prison system, my youngest daughter, Zephyrah, and she's a chaplain now at hospice. And when she was in Georgia in school at Emory, she worked there in the women's prison system. She told me about women who were in jail because they stole bread to feed their children. In jail for more than 20 years for stealing bread to feed a child. That to me is wrong. I don't condone people selling drugs and that kind of thing. And yes, if they're caught, they should be incarcerated. But not that this one is incarcerated for a longer period of time than this one because of the color of their skin. I think that if the crime is done and it's for white or black, the time should be the same. Not try to put one in for life and the other can get out in a short period of time. Those type of things are there. We also know that even today, Jonathan, even today, it was reported to us that at third grade, if a child cannot read at a third grade level, that is the point that is used for building prisons and then making sure that our kids are incarcerated. Because if they can't read at that proper level that's designated, then they are targeted as persons for the system. I heard that when I was in Lake City, and I've heard it since I've been back here. I have grandsons, and it bothers me to know that if they're deficient in a way, that somebody's lining them up to go to prison. That would never happen with mine, because I'll fight to the death to keep them out. But you have a lot of folks that don't have that kind of fortitude, and they just accept what comes their way because they feel like they have no voice, they have no way to be heard, and they just agonize and suffer the pain. So that's the reason, I see it everywhere. Used to be if you go in a store, if you walk past a white person with a purse, they grab the side of their purse and hold it because they thought you were going to try to take their purse.
I've had friends who've said that they've either done that or that's happened to them. So
yes. Just little, you might not think anything about that you clutch your purse. But if the person walking past you happens to be Black or African American, and somebody else walks beside you and you never clutch it, You have to think subconsciously, why did I do that?
Mm.
What was I taught? Why do I have that fear? A lot of times we don't deal with those things. They're just
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
and they're manifested in situations.
Well, and a friend of mine shared a while back about a term that a lot of people use that's microaggressions. And so this idea that even if somebody doesn't physically harm somebody or threaten anybody or say anything explicitly about race, that if you are that person who, when they walk by somebody else, that other person clutches their purse, or you hear the sound of them locking their car door,
Exactly.
that the cumulative effect of that is can be staggering. And I was just curious. I mean, are there some of those kind of microaggressions that maybe you have experienced that would go completely over my head that I wouldn't even notice, and yet that you have felt that toll from?
Well, I have a good one. Let me say this. We all say we have black friends or white friends, okay?
Mm.
Now, when we say that, is that true?
Right.
What I've experienced is this. We know folks, but we don't know them well enough to invite them to your home.
Mm.
How many times has your black friend been to your home?
Right.
How many times, when my children were in school, in high school, they had white friends, and we invited them over. They had their white friends said that they were friends with my children, but my children never got to go to their homes. They were never invited there. Um, it's amazing to me. I have a friend. His name is Tommy, and Tommy is Jewel. We've been friends for years. We went to Daniel High School. He's white, and I met him after I got married and everything. But we just became close friends. And another young man, Ray, and I'd have to go to Tommy's house. It was funny to go to Tommy's house. We'd have to slip in and go to the basement and sit down there and talk and slip out so that his mother didn't know that I was there.
Mm.
That's in Clemson on 93. And Tommy once, as we had gotten older and we were more mature and everything, Tommy said to me, he said, I wish they sent all them black folks back to Africa. And I looked at Tommy and I said, Tommy, you're saying that about me. He said, oh, no, I'm not saying that about you. No, I don't mean you.
Mm.
And I said, if you say it about any of us, you're saying it about all of us. We worked through that. We had conversations. We talked. And we are still good friends today. But there are times when we don't realize that some of the things that we do or say will spark that little part in a person to say, wait a minute, a friend wouldn't say that, or a friend wouldn't do that. And it happens.
And it sounds like he wasn't even aware of that until you pointed it out
Exactly.
to him.
Exactly. He just thought all of those people, not me, all of those people need to go back. But he didn't, those people didn't choose to come here anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They were brought here.
Mm-hmm.
They were brought here as indentured servants, and they were treated badly. They lived in shacks, and some of those shacks still are down. You can see them as you're driving downstate, especially in Lake City, out in the fields. They're still there, almost falling to the ground.
Right.
But, that's where people live. That's where the whole family lived. If you were fair-skinned, and the only reason you were fair-skinned is because you're an offspring of a master who took advantage of a wife and had a child. And so a mulatta, they're called mulattas. And as mulattas, you got to work in the house, not in the field. Take care of the baby of the master's wife and do those things, cook their meals. But if you were dark hue, you worked in the fields and you did all the hard labor. So even there was a disparity, and it caused a disparity amongst blacks in the sense that if you were fair, are almost white, people would hire you. You could go get a job in a place, no problem. But if you're dark, you had a problem. So then that separated us among ourselves. Started to look down on those who were darker and look up to those who were fairer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that stuff is ingrained in folks and they don't even really realize it.
Yeah. Thank you again for tuning into the second part of my conversation with Pastor Carleathea Benson. You're invited to tune in next week for the third and final part of our conversation. So look forward to seeing you then.